Grand Marshal Torren Voss was murdered by the Emperor at 58. One breath after dying, he woke on an execution block with a sword above his neck, and the man about to behead him was Torren Voss at 26. 600 soldiers screamed for the death of Merrick, the most hated traitor in Imperial history. Torren looked down and realized the condemned body was now his. Somehow, death had returned him to the innocent man he had personally executed 32 years earlier. His younger self demanded final words. Torren stared into the arrogant face he used to wear and said, "I am what you become. You killed this man today, saved the Emperor for 32 years, and received poison as your retirement gift." Only moments earlier, or 3 decades later, Torren had been celebrating the Empire's final victory. Emperor Othmar raised a jeweled cup, smiled across the banquet table, and explained that beloved heroes eventually became more dangerous than enemy armies. The poison dropped Torren beneath a mural of his own conquests. His officers lowered their eyes while Othmar ordered the musicians to play louder, ensuring that the Empire would applaud while its greatest defender died unheard. Only the gray-haired Sabine Rook fought to reach him. She struck 2 royal guards with a serving tray and shouted that Torren had survived arrows, frozen rivers, and military soup, so poisoned wine was an embarrassingly lazy way to kill him. Torren saw her tears and remembered every homecoming he had postponed until after one more campaign. His fingers stopped inches from hers, darkness took him, and a trumpet dragged him into the rain-soaked courtyard of Fort Rellan. Now his hands were younger, bound, and marked by Merrick's crescent scar. The impossible truth settled over him. He had returned inside the alleged traitor whose pleas he had once ignored, while his younger self stood ready to repeat the crime. Young Torren called the story pathetic and pressed the blade closer. The older man studied the stance he had practiced for 40 years, then delivered a far more offensive final statement. "Your left heel is floating." The courtyard went silent. Torren added that the sword was 3 degrees too high, and the silver cape made its owner look like an ambitious curtain. Several soldiers laughed before remembering that the curtain could order their funerals. Young Torren lifted the blade for the execution. Torren watched his shoulder tighten and knew the strike before it began, because he had practiced that motion every morning for 40 years. He twisted at the instant the sword descended. The blade split the wooden block beside his neck, and Torren drove his bound wrists into young Torren's elbow, forcing the celebrated captain to drop his weapon before the entire garrison. The chanting stopped. One soldier whispered that the traitor had disarmed Torren Voss. Another whispered that repeating it aloud might result in additional funerals. Young Torren lunged barehanded. The older Torren stepped inside his reach, hooked his ankle, and sent his former self face first into a puddle. For 3 perfect seconds, nobody moved. Torren looked down at the silver cape floating in muddy water and admitted that history had improved the moment considerably. Young Torren rose with murder in his eyes and mud on his teeth. Torren calmly told him that anger shortened his right step, the same flaw that would nearly cost him an arm at Red Hollow 7 years later. That prediction froze young Torren more effectively than any weapon. Red Hollow was a restricted operation that had not yet been planned, and no prisoner should have known its name. The fort commander, General Harlan Grieve, ordered the archers to aim. Torren counted 40 bows, 6 nervous fingers, and 1 man pointing an arrow at his friend's helmet instead of the prisoner. Torren raised his bound hands. He said killing him now would guarantee that everyone in the western barracks died before midnight. Grieve called it a desperate lie. Torren answered that 12 enemy scouts were already inside Fort Rellan wearing laundry uniforms, and 1 was currently hiding beneath the commander's private bed. The general went pale for reasons that appeared unrelated to military security. Young Torren noticed and slowly asked what else was under that bed. Grieve shouted that this was neither the time nor the battlefield for irrelevant intelligence. Torren decided he had missed being young more than he had missed senior officers. A bell rang from the western wall. Smoke rose beyond the barracks, followed by screams and the unmistakable crash of an opening gate. Torren's warning had arrived 11 minutes earlier than he remembered. Enemy soldiers poured through the service passage while hidden scouts attacked the armory. The archers turned in confusion, and a crossbow bolt flew from the upper gallery toward young Torren's unprotected back. Torren moved before thought could interfere. He slammed his shoulder into his younger self. taking the bolt across Merrick's upper arm and driving them both behind the execution platform. Pain flashed through his borrowed body. It was too sharp, too deep, and strangely distant, as if another man were screaming from behind a locked door inside his skull. A voice whispered in his mind, "You let them kill me once. Do not waste my body twice." Torren forgot the battle for half a heartbeat. The voice belonged to Merrick Dane. Young Torren grabbed him by the collar and demanded to know why a traitor had saved his life. Torren told him gratitude could wait until after they prevented the fort from becoming an expensive cemetery. He pointed toward the bell tower and ordered 3 archers to fire at its lower window. Grieve demanded to know who had placed the condemned man in command. Torren replied, "Competence." Young Torren stared at the enemy flooding the courtyard, then at the officers awaiting instructions. Pride fought with common sense on his face, and common sense achieved its first recorded victory. He ordered the archers to obey. Their arrows struck the bell tower just as an enemy signalman raised a red lantern. The lantern shattered, preventing a second force beyond the eastern ridge from receiving the command to advance. Torren told the shield unit to abandon the gate and form a wedge facing the kitchens. Grieve protested that no enemy would attack through a room full of soup. The kitchen wall exploded inward. Soldiers stared at Grieve. He quietly asked Torren whether the soup could still be saved. Torren seized the fallen execution sword with his bound hands. The weapon felt clumsy in Merrick's narrower grip, but 32 years of memory guided the steel where muscle could not. He cut the rope around his wrists, turned the same motion into a parry, and redirected an enemy's spear into the ground. Then he struck the attacker's chest with the flat of the blade and sent him crashing into a barrel. Torren avoided killing when he could. These invaders were not the true enemy. Most were mercenaries hired to create panic, and dead men could not reveal who had paid them. Young Torren noticed the restraint and accused him of protecting his allies. Torren kicked a knife away from the young captain's boot and replied that prisoners answered questions more reliably than corpses. The words sounded familiar because young Torren would repeat them for decades, always believing he had invented them after this battle. 3 mercenaries rushed the platform together. Torren ducked the first blade, trapped the second beneath his elbow, and used the third man's momentum to knock all 3 into Grieve's ceremonial fountain. Grieve watched a marble statue lose its nose and announced that the enemy had now made the conflict personal. Torren shouted for the western squad to throw sand across the courtyard. Young Torren understood immediately and ordered the men to obey before Grieve could ask whether they were planning to defeat an army through aggressive gardening. Wet footprints appeared in the scattered sand, revealing 6 infiltrators wearing stolen imperial cloaks. The defenders surrounded them, and the false soldiers surrendered after realizing their disguise had become matching evidence. The enemy captain retreated toward the open gate. Torren recognized the black knot tied around his wrist, a secret mark used by Crown Prince Othmar's intelligence network. The revelation struck harder than the crossbow bolt. Othmar had not begun betraying Torren at the end of the war. He had been arranging disasters from the beginning. Torren chased the captain, but Merrick's injured arm suddenly went numb. His vision doubled, his knees weakened, and the inner voice returned with a warning that this body did not belong to him alone. For one terrifying second, Torren lost control. Merrick's hand opened by itself. The sword fell, and the enemy captain turned with a dagger aimed at their heart. Inside the shared darkness, Torren saw a young man chained behind a wall of fractured memories. Merrick was pale, furious, and very much alive. Merrick demanded to know who had stolen his body. Torren answered with the truth because a dagger was approaching and introductions felt unusually urgent. Merrick stared at him, then laughed once without humor. The famous Grand Marshal had returned after personally approving Merrick's execution. Fate, he said, clearly enjoyed cheap theater. Torren accepted the insult and asked for control of the left leg. Merrick refused. Torren pointed out that maintaining moral authority would be difficult after they were both stabbed. Merrick gave him the leg. Their body pivoted aside at the last instant. The dagger missed their heart, and Torren regained the right hand long enough to seize the captain's wrist. Merrick controlled the injured arm, ignoring the pain, and drove an elbow into the attacker's jaw. For the first time, 2 enemies sharing one body fought as a single soldier. They brought the captain down alive. The remaining mercenaries saw their leader captured and lowered their weapons. Fort Rellan survived an assault that history had originally blamed on Merrick's supposed treason. Torren surrendered the sword and stepped away from the prisoner. Young Torren immediately placed the blade at his throat again, apparently unwilling to let a successful defense interrupt a perfectly good execution. Torren asked whether his younger self had learned nothing. Young Torren replied that he had learned Merrick was dangerous, irritating, and somehow even more suspicious when helpful. General Grieve examined the captured captain's black wrist knot. He recognized it as a Royal Intelligence cipher but quickly hid the mark beneath his glove. Torren saw the movement. Grieve was not surprised by Othmar's involvement. Before Torren could expose him, hoofbeats thundered beyond the gate. A medical convoy entered under a white banner, led by a 26-year-old Sabine Rook. Torren forgot the sword against his neck. Sabine dismounted before her horse stopped moving. Her dark braid whipped across her shoulder. Her physician's coat was stained with road dust, and her eyes carried the same fearless impatience Torren had missed for 32 years. She surveyed the wounded, spotted young Torren standing over a bleeding prisoner, and demanded to know whether he had confused an execution yard with a hospital again. Young Torren lowered his sword half an inch. He said Merrick was a convicted traitor. Sabine replied that a conviction did not prevent blood loss, though stupidity occasionally appeared resistant to treatment. Several soldiers turned away to hide smiles. Torren remembered falling in love with her on this exact day, then spending 3 decades pretending duty had made the decision complicated. Sabine approached Merrick and pressed her fingers around the crossbow wound. Torren flinched, not from pain but from the impossible warmth of someone he had watched grow old beside him without ever allowing her close enough. She told him to stop staring. Torren replied that he was making sure she was real. Sabine glanced at young Torren and asked whether the prisoner had struck his head. Young Torren said Merrick had mostly struck his dignity. Torren answered that the injury looked survivable, although the silver cape might never recover. Sabine laughed before she could stop herself. Young Torren's expression suggested he had just discovered a second act of treason. The sound broke something open inside Torren. In his first life, he had earned Sabine's laughter slowly, lost it gradually, and spent his final years hearing it only when she spoke to other people. He promised himself he would not waste it again. Merrick's voice cut through the emotion. He warned Torren not to build a new life with stolen hands while the body's rightful owner remained chained in darkness. Torren silently answered that he intended to free him. Merrick demanded why he should trust the man who had condemned him without listening. Torren had no defense. He remembered Merrick standing on this platform, bruised and exhausted, insisting that the orders were forged. Young Torren had called the explanation cowardice, and ended the hearing in 7 minutes. Sabine finished binding the wound and noticed tears in Merrick's eyes. Torren claimed the medicine stung. She looked at the dry bandage, then politely chose not to embarrass him further. General Grieve ordered Merrick returned to the underground cell until a second execution could be arranged. Torren asked why the enemy captain was not being questioned first. Grieve declared that command decisions were beyond a traitor's rank. Torren answered that surviving the last command decision had apparently been beyond everyone else's imagination. The soldiers murmured agreement. Grieve's face reddened as authorities slipped away from him in public, one quiet laugh at a time. Young Torren stepped between them. To Grieve's surprise, he ordered that Merrick remain alive until the attack was investigated. Torren felt an absurd flicker of pride in his younger self. Then young Torren added that he personally intended to discover how Merrick knew his secret weakness at Red Hollow. Torren said it was not a secret weakness. Young Torren asked what else he called being thrown face first into mud before 600 witnesses. Sabine suggested, "A practical lesson in balance." Even the archers laughed this time. Grieve ordered everyone back to work and stormed toward the command hall. Torren watched him signal a messenger near the eastern stairwell, confirming that the general intended to warn someone outside the fort. Torren allowed the guards to escort him below because the cell contained the evidence Merrick had tried to present before his execution, a leather journal hidden behind the third foundation stone. The memory did not belong to Torren. It came from Merrick, along with the image of a frightened mother and 2 younger sisters imprisoned in a royal hunting lodge. Othmar had threatened to kill them unless Merrick accepted the forged orders and remained silent. Torren stopped on the dungeon stairs. The scale of his old mistake opened beneath him like a grave. Merrick said those women had waited for help that never came. In the first timeline, Othmar killed them the morning after Merrick's execution and erased their names from every registry. Torren swore that would not happen again. Merrick answered that oaths from Grand Marshal Torren Voss had once meant something to him. Now they were only expensive noises made by a man who had already been wrong. The guards locked Torren inside the cell and left. He counted their footsteps, waited for silence, then pulled the loose foundation stone free with his uninjured hand. Behind it lay Merrick's journal, a royal transport schedule, and 3 sealed letters bearing Othmar's private cipher. Together, they could prove coercion, but only if the witnesses named inside survived the next 5 days. One letter identified General Grieve as Othmar's handler. Another ordered the destruction of Fort Rellan after the execution so Merrick's forged treason would appear responsible for the loss. The final letter contained a list of officers marked for death. Sabine Rook was third. Torren folded the letter with suddenly steady hands. Saving the fort had changed the schedule, but Othmar would adapt, and Grieve now knew Merrick possessed knowledge no condemned officer should have. Merrick asked what Torren planned to do from inside a locked cell with one injured arm, no allies, and a younger version of himself eager to finish the execution. Torren smiled for the first time since waking. He had once conquered 7 nations with fewer advantages, although none of those campaigns required persuading his younger self to stop behaving like him. He told Merrick they would rescue his family, protect Sabine, expose Grieve, and force young Torren to confront the truth before Othmar could destroy the evidence. Merrick called the plan impossible. Torren agreed, then pulled a thin surgical pin Sabine had deliberately left beneath his bandage and inserted it into the lock. From the corridor, Sabine's voice quietly informed him that he had exactly 10 minutes before the guards returned. Torren looked through the bars and found her waiting with a medical bag, a stolen key, and an expression that promised several uncomfortable questions. For the first time in either life, Torren chose trust before command. He placed Merrick's journal in Sabine's hands and said, "If I tell you who I really am, you will either save this empire or have me examined for a serious head injury." Sabine studied Torren through the bars, then studied the journal in her hands. She said a head injury would be the comforting diagnosis, because the alternative involved treason, time travel, and far more paperwork than any physician should endure before breakfast. Torren told her about the poison banquet, her gray hair, and the serving trays she had used as a weapon. Sabine's skepticism faltered when he repeated the private promise she had made beside her father's grave, words she had never shared with Merrick or anyone else. She slapped him. The sound echoed through the dungeon. Torren accepted it without protest, but Merrick complained inside their mind that it was his face being punished for another man's emotional failures. Sabine's hand trembled. She asked why Torren remembered her growing old but apparently did not remember marrying her. His silence answered before he could find a less shameful arrangement of words. She laughed once, bitterly. In one future, she had waited 32 years for a man who could conquer nations but remained terrified of an honest conversation. Torren admitted that dying had improved his priorities. Sabine replied that death was an unnecessarily dramatic substitute for maturity, though she supposed men would try anything to avoid apologizing on time. Footsteps sounded above them. Sabine unlocked the cell and ordered him into her medical cart beneath a pile of blood-stained sheets. Torren objected that Grand Marshals did not travel inside laundry. Merrick reminded him that condemned traitors rarely received carriages. Torren climbed in. Sabine wheeled the cart past 2 guards, announcing that it contained contaminated bandages from prisoners with swamp fever. Both men stepped aside so quickly that one saluted the wall. At the stairwell, young Torren blocked their path. He looked from Sabine to the suspiciously tall pile of sheets, and asked why the medical waste was wearing military boots. Torren remained still. Sabine answered that the boots belonged to a dead prisoner whose body had become highly contagious, particularly to officers wearing silver capes. Young Torren stared at her. Sabine stared back with the confidence of a woman willing to invent new diseases until he surrendered. He pulled away the top sheet. Torren rose from the cart and struck first, catching young Torren's wrist before he could draw his sword. They froze inches apart, older regret staring into younger suspicion. Young Torren called for the guards. Torren said Grieve intended to destroy the fort before dawn, and handed him Othmar's letter naming the targets. The captain read the royal cipher, but his expression remained hard. A forged letter had condemned Merrick once, so another letter could not automatically clear him. Torren felt an uncomfortable spark of approval. His younger self was finally questioning convenient evidence, unfortunately at the exact moment Torren needed him to be convenient. Sabine suggested they settle the matter somewhere not surrounded by men paid by Grieve. Young Torren refused to release Merrick, but agreed to move him personally, keeping his sword against Torren's back. They entered an unused treatment room. Torren explained the attack, the captive families, and Grieve's role, leaving out only the poison Othmar would use decades later because young Torren already looked close to punching a wall. Young Torren demanded proof of the impossible claim. Torren listed the contents of his locked footlocker: 2 chipped training medals, Sabine's first letter, and a stuffed rabbit hidden beneath spare uniforms. Sabine slowly turned toward the young captain. Torren had always been told the rabbit was a tactical cushion for protecting fragile equipment. Young Torren's ears reddened. He insisted that Captain Whiskers was irrelevant to national security. Torren stared at his former self. He had forgotten the rabbit's name, and recovering it felt more humiliating than being poisoned by a king. Young Torren finally asked where Merrick's family was being held. Torren showed him the transport schedule pointing to Othmar's hunting lodge at Briar Lake, 4 hours east of the fort. Sabine warned that Merrick's mother and sisters would be moved at sunset, barely 3 hours away. They needed horses, weapons, and authority Grieve could not revoke. Young Torren proposed arresting Grieve immediately. Torren stopped him, explaining that Grieve's messenger had already left, and would order the hostages killed if the general failed to report on schedule. Their first goal was not justice. It was making Grieve believe his plan remained intact. Torren instructed young Torren to announce that Merrick had died from his wound, while Sabine would certify the body. Grieve would relax, and they could leave disguised as a medical convoy. Sabine asked where they would obtain a corpse resembling Merrick. Torren pointed toward young Torren. The captain stared at him in outrage. Torren clarified that he needed only the silver cape stuffed beneath the sheet, since Grieve's fear of disease had already proven stronger than his attention to detail. Merrick observed that Torren's greatest tactical asset appeared to be General Grieve's cowardice. Torren replied that every commander should use the terrain available. They returned to the courtyard with a covered stretcher. Sabine announced Merrick's death loudly enough for Grieve to hear from the command steps. Grieve approached but refused to inspect the body after Sabine described swelling, discoloration, and a fictional symptom involving the sudden loss of eyebrows. Young Torren solemnly advised him not to risk it. His performance was excellent until the stuffed cape sleeve fell from the stretcher and waved at a passing soldier. Sabine stepped on the sleeve, coughed dramatically, and asked whether Grieve wished to assist with the examination. The general retreated so fast he nearly promoted himself to another province. Grieve ordered the corpse burned outside the eastern wall. That gave them exactly the exit Torren wanted, but it also placed 6 of Grieve's soldiers around the medical wagon. Torren hid beneath the stretcher while Sabine drove. Young Torren rode beside the escort, pretending to ensure the traitor's remains were destroyed properly. As the gate opened, Grieve called after them. Torren's hand closed around a concealed knife while Sabine stopped the wagon without looking back. Grieve tossed young Torren a flask and suggested pouring oil over the body. Young Torren caught it, thanked him, and said he had always preferred traitors thoroughly cooked. The wagon rolled beyond the wall. Sabine waited until the fort disappeared behind the hill before telling young Torren that his sense of humor required immediate medical attention. Torren climbed out and breathed free air. Young Torren pointed out that he remained a prisoner. Torren replied that the distinction mattered less while they were committing treason together. They abandoned the road and entered the cedar woods. Sabine hid the wagon beneath branches while young Torren divided the escort into pairs and sent them toward false burial sites. Only Lieutenant Cauldron Moat refused to leave. He had served young Torren for 6 years and argued that loyalty required following his captain into whatever disaster he was obviously concealing. Torren remembered Cauldron dying at Red Hollow while protecting him. Seeing the lieutenant young, loud, and alive filled his throat with words he could not explain. Cauldron noticed the stare and asked whether Merrick admired his face. Torren answered that he was remembering how much quieter the lieutenant became when dead. Cauldron decided the traitor was unpleasant. Young Torren muttered that they finally agreed on something. They took 4 horses and rode east. Torren's borrowed body handled the saddle differently, leaning away from the injured arm, and Merrick silently corrected his balance before pride could throw them both into a ditch. Torren thanked him. Merrick said cooperation was not forgiveness. It was an attempt to prevent his family from paying for Torren's mistakes a second time. At noon, they found Greaves' messenger unconscious beside the road. His horse was gone, and a black feathered dart protruded from his coat. Sabine identified a sleeping agent used by the Royal Intelligence Office. Someone had intercepted Greaves' warning, which meant Othmar already suspected the operation had failed. Young Torren searched the messenger and found a replacement order inside his boot. It instructed the lodge guards to move Merrick's family immediately and eliminate anyone attempting a rescue. The order bore Othmar's seal and had been written less than an hour earlier. Cauldron asked how a prince 4 days away could send fresh instructions to an empty road. Torren looked toward the northern ridge, where a signal mirror flashed once between the trees. They were being watched. An arrow struck Torren's saddle. He rolled behind a fallen log while black-cloaked riders descended from both sides of the ravine. Young Torren drew his sword and ordered Cauldron to protect Sabine. Sabine drew 2 surgical knives and informed him that she had protected soldiers before he learned which end of a sword required holding. The attackers carried blunt-hooked weapons designed to capture rather than kill. Othmar wanted Merrick alive, which meant the prince did not know what evidence had survived. Torren counted 8 riders and identified their leader by the polished boots he kept away from the mud. He told young Torren to attack the most frightened man instead. The captain questioned the logic but followed it. The frightened rider immediately shouted for the others to protect him, revealing that the apparent coward was the actual commander. Young Torren knocked him from the saddle. Torren caught a hook chain around his bound shoulder, stepped forward instead of resisting, and pulled the attacker into Cauldron's waiting shield. Cauldron grinned and admitted the traitor had one useful idea. Torren promised to carve the compliment onto his memorial if the lieutenant ever managed a second. Sabine's knife pinned a rider's cloak to a tree without touching his skin. She warned him that the next throw would test whether royal spies could function with only one boot. The man surrendered his weapon. Cauldron whispered that Sabine frightened him more than the ambush, and both versions of Torren answered correct at the same time. Their shared response created a brief, deeply uncomfortable silence. The captured commander bit down on a false tooth containing poison. Sabine struck his jaw with the handle of her knife, forced the capsule free, and told him suicide required an appointment. Torren questioned the man using details from future intelligence reports. Each secret he revealed made the spy more convinced Merrick belonged to a rival faction inside the palace. The spy finally disclosed that the hostages had not been moved toward the capital. They were being taken to an abandoned bell foundry 2 miles south, where an execution team waited. Young Torren wanted to rush there. Torren refused, recognizing the information as too easily surrendered and the foundry as ideal ground for an ambush. He asked the spy which of Merrick's sisters wore a green ribbon. The man answered that both did, contradicting Merrick's memory that 14-year-old Nessa hated green because it reminded her of boiled cabbage. The foundry was a trap. Torren searched the commander's saddle and found Lake reeds trapped beneath the buckle. The hostages were still near Briar Lake, probably beneath the lodge in an old wine cellar omitted from modern maps. Merrick supplied a childhood memory of visiting the estate with his father. Behind the boathouse stood a drainage tunnel narrow enough for one person and unpleasant enough that nobles had forgotten it existed. Cauldron looked at the black water flowing from the tunnel and asked whether betrayal always smelled like dead fish. Sabine replied that politics usually smelled worse. They left the captured spies tied for a patrol to recover and approached the lake through the marsh. Young Torren argued that a frontal assault would be faster. Torren asked whether his younger self wanted speed or surviving hostages. The captain hated the question because he recognized it as one he would later use against impatient subordinates. Inside the tunnel, freezing water reached their waists. Cauldron stepped into a hidden hole and vanished with a startled curse before Torren pulled him back by the collar. Cauldron emerged covered in weeds and claimed he had been checking the depth. Sabine congratulated him on discovering the bottom with his face. They reached an iron grate beneath the lodge. Merrick remembered the locking mechanism, but when Torren reached for it, control of their hands suddenly disappeared. Merrick seized the body and refused to continue until Torren promised his mother would hear the truth. He would not allow her to embrace the face of her son while another man accepted her love. Torren agreed. If they survived, Merrick would speak through their shared body, and Torren would reveal every part of his role in the first timeline. Control returned. Together they opened the grate. The cellar contained empty chains and a still-warm lantern. A child's wooden bird lay crushed beside the stairs, an object Merrick recognized as Nessa's favorite carving. Bootprints led upward, but Torren noticed spilled flour beneath a wine rack. He pushed the rack aside and uncovered a concealed chamber. Merrick's mother, Eloan Dane, stood inside holding a broken bottle like a sword. Nessa and 19-year-old Vara sheltered behind her, exhausted but alive. Eloan saw her son's face and nearly dropped the bottle. Merrick took control before Torren could speak. He whispered the childhood name of the fox she used to sew onto his winter gloves. Eloan crossed the room and held him with such force that his wounded arm shook. Torren felt her relief through Merrick's body but refused to touch it. He withdrew into the shared darkness, giving Merrick the first private moment he had possessed since the execution platform. Merrick told his family about the forged orders, though he did not yet explain the older soldier inside his mind. Eloan said she had never believed the confession because her son lied badly and apologized to furniture after bumping into it. Nessa asked whether his new habit of staring into empty space was a prison injury. Merrick said the empty space contained a very old problem. Torren objected to being called very old. Vara heard Merrick answer himself and quietly asked Sabine how hard he had been struck in the head. Sabine replied that the situation remained under professional review. A slow clap came from the cellar stairs. General Grieve descended with 12 soldiers, his uniform clean and his smile relieved. He explained that the false messenger, false trail, and deliberately visible lake reeds had all been designed to guide Merrick to the hidden chamber. Othmar had wanted the journal and every witness gathered in one convenient room. Young Torren raised his sword, but Grieve's archers appeared along the upper balcony with arrows aimed at the Dane family. Fighting would turn the cellar into a grave. Grieve ordered Torren to surrender the journal. Torren handed it over without resistance. Young Torren stared in disbelief. Grieve laughed, declaring that the legendary Captain Voss had risked his career for a traitor who folded the moment his family was threatened. Grieve opened the journal and found pages filled with Sabine's detailed notes about chronic stomach discomfort, including a recommendation that the general avoid cheese before military ceremonies. Sabine apologized for the diagnosis. Cauldron failed to hide a laugh, and even one archer lowered his bow to reconsider several previous banquets. The real journal was already wrapped inside the unconscious messenger's coat on the Western Road, where the returning patrol would deliver it directly to Fort Rellan's judicial clerk. Grieve's smile vanished. Torren explained that a trap remained useful even after being discovered, provided the enemy believed he was the only person clever enough to set one. Young Torren stepped forward and publicly arrested Grieve for conspiracy, hostage-taking, and crimes against military digestion. Grieve grabbed Nessa and pressed a dagger near her shoulder, retreating toward the stairs. He warned that one move would cost the girl her life. Merrick's rage surged so violently that he seized the body and charged. Torren fought him for control, knowing one reckless step would give the archers a reason to fire. Their divided movement made the body stumble. Grieve mocked Merrick for being too weak even to walk straight, and the watching soldiers laughed nervously with their commander. Torren stopped resisting Merrick and instead shared every memory he possessed of Grieve's sword habits. Merrick understood the offer, not control, but trust. Merrick kicked the loose cork from a wine barrel. Pressurized red wine blasted across the cellar floor, forcing Grieve to turn his head while Nessa dropped beneath his arm. Young Torren crossed the distance and struck the dagger away. Cauldron raised his shield over the family, Sabine pulled Nessa to safety, and the archers found themselves aiming at their own commander. Grieve slipped in the wine, crashed into a stack of empty barrels, and emerged wearing one around his waist. Torren informed him that the shape suited his command style, loud, hollow, and difficult to move. The soldiers lowered their bows. Greaves' authority collapsed beneath their laughter before young Torren placed him in chains. Eloan approached Merrick, but this time Torren remained present. Merrick told her another man shared his body, the same commander who had once failed him, now trying to change that future. Eloan looked into her son's eyes and addressed Torren directly. She said saving them did not erase an execution that only he remembered, but choosing to listen now was the first decent thing he had done with her son's life. Torren promised he would return the body or die trying. Eloan answered that dying was precisely the habit causing their problems and ordered him to find a more useful solution. Outside the lodge, dawn light spread across Briar Lake. Merrick's family was safe, Greaves was captured, and the evidence would reach the fort before Othmar could erase it. Young Torren offered Merrick his hand. He did not grant forgiveness or trust, but admitted that the man he had nearly executed had saved the fort, exposed the traitor, and shown better judgment than its general. Merrick accepted the hand while Torren remained silent inside. The gesture belonged to the innocent officer who should have received it 32 years earlier. A horn sounded from the northern road. Riders wearing the prince's white and gold colors surrounded the lake, carrying a royal decree that named young Torren Voss, not Merrick Dane, as the architect of the attack on Fort Rellan. At their head rode Crown Prince Othmar Rusk, young, smiling, and decades away from the poisoned banquet. He announced that he had come personally to arrest the Empire's arriving at a garden party instead of an armed standoff. He greeted young Torren by rank, expressed sorrow over his sudden betrayal, and never once looked surprised to see Merrick alive. That single omission told Torren more than any confession. Othmar had known the execution failed before Greaves could report it, and the prince wanted them to notice that he knew. Young Torren held up the captured general and accused him of forging orders. Othmar examined Greaves with polite disappointment, the expression of a man finding dust on furniture he planned to replace. Greaves immediately claimed young Torren had forced him to confess. The barrel remained stuck around his waist, reducing the dignity of his testimony, but Othmar ordered royal guards to free him. Cauldron asked whether removing the barrel counted as tampering with evidence. Sabine said the general appeared to be wearing the evidence, so technically they were undressing a crime scene. Several royal soldiers smiled. Othmar noticed every one of them, and the smiles disappeared. His power did not come from shouting. It came from making people wonder what their laughter would cost later. Othmar presented the decree bearing King Roderick's seal. It accused young Torren of hiring foreign mercenaries, attacking Fort Rellan, abducting Greaves, and manipulating Merrick's grieving family. Young Torren called the charges absurd. Othmar agreed that treason often looked absurd until a trusted officer explained it with sufficient confidence, and witnesses too frightened to disagree. Torren heard his future murderer speaking through a younger, smoother face. The emperor at the poison banquet had used the same rhythm, pausing before each lie so listeners could mistake calmness for truth. He stepped forward and asked why the decree called Merrick dead if Othmar already knew he was alive. The prince finally looked at him, and recognition flickered where curiosity should have been. Othmar answered that royal scribes occasionally made mistakes. Torren replied that this scribe had also dated the decree 6 hours before the attack, when young Torren was still supervising Merrick's execution. The royal guards glanced at one another. Othmar's smile remained, but Greaves began sweating inside his newly liberated uniform. Torren requested a lawful field hearing under Article 9 of the Frontier Command Code. Any officer accused during an active invasion could demand testimony before neutral soldiers instead of surrendering to distant royal custody. Young Torren stared at him. Article 9 would not be written for another 12 years. Torren corrected himself and invoked Article 7, an older rule concerning livestock theft that used nearly identical language. Sabine whispered that saving the Empire through a law about missing goats felt appropriate. Othmar objected, but Cauldron produced a pocket copy of the code. His mother had given it to him after correctly predicting that his mouth would one day require legal protection. Article 7 allowed the accused to challenge disputed ownership before armed witnesses. Torren argued that the crown claimed ownership of young Torren's loyalty. while young Torren claimed it still belonged to him. The interpretation was outrageous. It was also technically valid, which made it the most dangerous kind of outrageous. Othmar could refuse only by admitting that royal authority ignored its own laws. With soldiers from 3 commands watching, he accepted the hearing and gave Torren 10 minutes to embarrass himself. Torren thanked him for the generosity. He had needed only 5. The hearing formed beside the lake. Othmar placed Grieve and 3 royal clerks on one side. Young Torren stood with Merrick, Sabine, Cauldron, and the rescued family on the other. Grieve repeated that young Torren planned the fort attack. Torren asked why the general had placed the alleged mastermind in charge of the defense after the gate opened. Grieve claimed panic had clouded his judgment. Torren observed that the cloud seemed unusually selective, since Grieve had remembered to save his private wine while forgetting the western barracks. Cauldron produced the flask Grieve had thrown to their wagon. Its oil carried the same blue resin used on the attacker's signal lantern, connecting the general's supplies to the mercenaries. Grieve said many oils looked blue. Sabine poured 1 drop onto his polished boot. It ignited in a harmless flash and burned away the decorative tassel. She apologized to the boot. Grieve demanded an apology for himself, but Sabine explained that the boot had contributed more useful evidence. Laughter moved through the soldiers. This time Othmar could not punish everyone without making the hearing look controlled, so he allowed humiliation to consume his witness in public. Torren called Eloan Dane. She described Othmar's agents threatening her daughters and forcing Merrick's confession, but Othmar dismissed the mother's testimony as emotional loyalty. Eloan answered that loyalty was indeed emotional, which explained why the prince appeared unfamiliar with it. Even young Torren lowered his head to hide a smile. Othmar shifted tactics. He asked why Merrick knew details of an attack that had not happened and how he predicted an operation at Red Hollow years before its planning. The question transformed Merrick from victim into mystery. Soldiers who had begun supporting him stepped away, remembering every superstition about possessed bodies and forbidden magic. Torren could expose his identity, but doing so might place Merrick under temple custody. He instead said Grieve's network had leaked proposed campaigns, and Merrick learned the name while being interrogated. Othmar asked which interrogator had mentioned it. Torren named a dead intelligence captain from the future, then realized the man was currently alive and standing among the prince's guards. Captain Valen stepped forward in outrage. Torren had given Othmar exactly the contradiction he wanted. Merrick seized control long enough to whisper that lies were Torren's weakest battlefield. Torren admitted he had spent 40 years ordering other people to perform them. Sabine requested permission to examine Captain Valen. She claimed Merrick had described a distinctive injury on the interrogator's left shoulder, evidence he had already been involved. Valen refused too quickly. Othmar ordered him to comply, confident Sabine had invented the claim. Beneath Valen's uniform lay a black falcon tattoo and a fresh burn shaped like the cipher seal found on Grieve's letters. The soldiers recognized the covert mark immediately. Sabine had noticed him protecting that shoulder during the ambush. She had not known what was hidden there, only that guilty men became remarkably cooperative when physicians sounded specific. Torren told Merrick that Sabine had once diagnosed an assassin by the way he avoided sitting down. Merrick asked whether Torren had ever considered simply listening to this terrifying woman. The hearing turned. Valen's presence proved royal intelligence had operated near Fort Rellan before the official decree, weakening every claim that Othmar arrived only after learning of the attack. Young Torren demanded the prince submit to questioning. Othmar calmly removed his white glove and invoked royal immunity, reminding everyone that law protected blood before truth. Torren answered that immunity protected Othmar from arrest, not embarrassment. He asked why a prince supposedly 4 days away carried lake mud from Briar's eastern shore on his riding boots. Othmar looked down. The stain was tiny, but 600 trained observers suddenly found it more fascinating than any royal seal. Torren concluded that Othmar had been near the lodge before the fort attack and waited for Grieve's plan to succeed. The prince had not come to investigate treason, he had come to supervise it. Othmar applauded the argument. Then he produced a sealed witness statement signed by Sabine Rook, declaring Merrick unstable, violent, and capable of manipulating military officers. Sabine recognized her handwriting but denied composing it. The statement quoted a private medical report stored in her locked chest, proving someone had copied her records. Othmar said forged evidence apparently existed on both sides. If his decree could be questioned, so could Greaves' letters, the journal, and every convenient object Torren had produced. The soldier's certainty fractured again. Torren understood Othmar's real strategy, not proving one's story, but making truth appear impossible until obedience felt safer than judgment. He asked young Torren to surrender voluntarily. The captain's face hardened. Torren explained that resisting now would divide the troops, endanger Merrick's family, and allow Othmar to claim a violent rebellion. Young Torren accused his older self of folding after one clever move. Torren replied that surrendering a position was not surrendering the war, a lesson youth rarely learned before sacrificing everyone nearby. Merrick objected from within. The royal prison convoy would separate them from Sabine and the evidence, giving Othmar control of every witness. Torren agreed, which was why they would not reach the royal prison. Young Torren lowered his sword and submitted. Othmar ordered Merrick, Sabine, Cauldron, and the Dane family arrested as accomplices, revealing that peaceful surrender had never been his intended limit. Torren smiled. By overreaching in front of neutral soldiers, Othmar had proved precisely what Torren needed. This was a purge, not an investigation. Commander Israpel of the Lake Patrol refused the order. She had lost a brother to a secret royal prison and would not hand children to unnamed interrogators without formal charges. 40 Lake soldiers joined her. Othmar ordered his guards to disarm them, and the peaceful hearing balanced on the edge of a battle no one could win cleanly. Torren stepped between both lines and invoked Article 7 again. Othmar snapped that the goat law could not possibly solve this problem. Cauldron opened the code and cheerfully discovered that disputed livestock remained under local protection until a magistrate ruled. He welcomed everyone to the herd. Even royal guards laughed. Othmar's expression finally cracked, not because the argument defeated him, but because ridicule made fear difficult to maintain. Commander Pell offered custody at Lakeside Garrison until a circuit magistrate arrived. Othmar accepted, knowing refusal would expose his contempt for royal law before his own men. As the prisoners entered wagons, Othmar passed close to Torren and whispered, "The wine should have killed you before you touched the cup." Torren stopped breathing. Othmar continued walking without looking back. No one else had heard, but Merrick felt the shock through their shared body and demanded an explanation. Torren had none. The young prince could not know the precise poisoner's schedule from a future 32 years away, unless Torren was not the only person carrying knowledge backward. Inside the wagon, Sabine noticed his shaking hands. Torren repeated Othmar's words, and young Torren's disbelief became fear for the first time. Cauldron suggested the prince might simply be extremely talented at threatening people. Sabine replied that predicting future beverages exceeded even royal arrogance. Merrick searched the memories surrounding Torren's death. Beneath the music and Sabine's voice, he discovered a sound Torren had overlooked. 12 metallic chimes ringing backward. Young Torren recognized the description. The royal treasury housed an ancient device called the Meridian Clock, said to preserve the final command of a dying king. Othmar had studied the clock for years. Officially it could record voices in crystal, but legends claimed it could send one memory to an earlier bearer of royal blood. Torren realized the future emperor had activated it during the poisoned banquet. Othmar had sent his memories backward, and Torren's dying soul must have been caught in the same event. His return inside Merrick was not divine mercy. It was collateral damage from Othmar's attempt to make his younger self unbeatable. The revelation changed everything. Othmar did not merely know several future events. He knew Torren's campaigns, allies, weaknesses, and every rebellion that would threaten his throne. Worse, future Othmar remembered Merrick dying on schedule. Torren's survival was the one deviation he could not fully predict, explaining both the prince's recognition and his caution. Young Torren asked how they could defeat a man who possessed 32 years of answers. Torren said the same way Merrick had defeated Grieve: stop behaving like the people those memories described. In the first timeline, Torren trusted institutions, avoided personal attachments, and answered every threat with military force. Othmar would build every trap around those habits. Therefore, their greatest weapons were choices the old Torren had never made: trusting Merrick, accepting Sabine's help, and allowing his younger self to question command. Sabine observed that saving the Empire apparently required Torren to develop a personality. Cauldron offered to pray for him, since some injuries were beyond medicine. Their laughter lasted only until the prison wagon turned toward the mountains instead of Lakeside Garrison. Commander Pell was no longer riding beside them. Royal guards controlled the convoy, and the lake soldiers had vanished at the previous crossroads without raising an alarm. Torren examined the driver through a crack and recognized Captain Rellan beneath a lake patrol helmet. Othmar had used the hearing merely to identify every officer willing to resist him. The wagon ahead carried Eloan and her daughters. A rear wagon held Sabine, Cauldron, and young Torren, separating the group exactly as Merrick had feared. Torren tested the door and found royal chain locks designed to tighten when cut. Merrick remembered that his father had manufactured similar locks before Othmar seized the workshop. The mechanism opened only when both side bolts turned simultaneously. One body could not reach them, but two minds could control different hands with perfect timing. Torren and Merrick tried. Their first attempt tightened the chains and pulled the door against Torren's nose. Merrick called the Grand Marshal's timing disgraceful. Torren reminded him that one of them had spent decades commanding armies while the other apologized to furniture. Merrick answered that furniture had never executed him. Torren conceded the point. On the second attempt, they stopped competing for control. Merrick guided the injured arm while Torren matched the stronger hand to his rhythm. Both bolts turned. The door opened without a sound. Torren climbed onto the moving wagon roof and saw the convoy approaching Glass Gorge, where the road narrowed between cliffs. In the original timeline, a rock slide there had killed an entire diplomatic party. Othmar was planning to bury the prisoners and blame mountain rebels. No bodies would be examined, and every inconvenient witness would disappear in one believable accident. Torren leaped to the family wagon. A guard spotted him, but Merrick took control and imitated Valen's voice, ordering the man to inspect a loose wheel. The guard obeyed before recognizing the prisoner. Torren quietly locked him inside the empty wagon and advised him to reconsider careers requiring independent thought. He freed Eloan, Nessa, and Vara, then gave them the guards' cloaks. Eloan demanded a weapon. Torren handed her a short baton after remembering what she had accomplished with the bottle. Nessa asked for a sword. Eloan said she could have one after finishing her arithmetic lessons, because captivity was not an excuse for declining academic standards. At the rear wagon, young Torren had already broken one hinge through brute force and trapped his silver cape in the other. Sabine was trying to cut him free while Cauldron provided unhelpful encouragement. Torren opened the door from outside. Young Torren claimed he had nearly escaped alone, though the cape hanging from the chains suggested the prison had captured him personally. Above the gorge, royal engineers released the first support rope. Boulders shifted against the cliff, and Valen ordered the convoy to accelerate into the kill zone. Torren looked at the falling mountainside, then handed command to Merrick. Othmar knew every plan Grand Marshal Torren Voss had ever made, so the next plan had to belong to the man history had never allowed to live. Merrick surveyed Glass Gorge through Torren's experienced eyes but ignored every military solution offered to him. Instead of outrunning the rockslide, he ordered everyone to turn the prison wagons around and charge directly toward Valen's royal escort. Young Torren called the idea suicidal. Merrick answered that only someone trained by Torren Voss would assume every moving object belonged on a battlefield instead of asking what 3 heavy wagons were originally built to carry. The wagons had transported mining equipment before Grieve converted them into mobile cells. Their reinforced floors could survive falling debris, but the lightly armored royal riders could not. Valen had unknowingly brought the prisoners 3 enormous shields. Merrick angled the wagons side by side beneath an abandoned stone bridge. Eloan and her daughters took shelter underneath while Sabine secured the injured and Cauldron tried to persuade frightened horses that screaming was already his responsibility. Valen ordered his riders forward, assuming the prisoners were trapped. Merrick waited until they entered the narrowest section, then released the wagon brakes and sent all 3 vehicles rolling downhill toward them. Royal horses scattered. The riders abandoned formation, exactly as Merrick intended, leaving Valen alone beneath the cliff when the first boulders fell. Young Torren wanted to leave the captain to his own trap. Merrick seized a rope, swung from the bridge, and pulled Valen away seconds before a rock crushed the place where he had been standing. Valen stared at the traitor who had saved him. Merrick said he needed the captain alive because Othmar already possessed enough obedient corpses. The surviving royal guards expected execution. Merrick instead ordered them beneath the reinforced bridge, and used the emptied wagons to redirect smaller rocks into the gorge. Young Torren understood the strategy too late. Merrick had not defeated Othmar's soldiers. He had forced them to survive together, turning witnesses against the prince's story of a murderous rebellion. Cauldron watched the last bolt of thunder pass and announced that the condemned traitor was annoyingly competent. Merrick replied that appreciation sounded better when accompanied by a formal apology and possibly land. The mountain finally settled. No prisoner had died, and 11 royal guards owed their lives to the very people they had been ordered to bury. Torren returned to the front of their shared mind and praised Merrick's command. Merrick admitted the words mattered, then immediately resented that they mattered after everything Torren had done. Valen tried to flee during the confusion. Nessa tripped him with an arithmetic slate, proving her mother had been correct that education remained useful during captivity. Eloin took command of the royal survivors before either Torren could speak. She ordered them to carry the wounded, collect every engineer's tool, and remember precisely which prince had attempted to bury them. A young guard named Brass confessed that Othmar had promised pardons for obeying. He had joined the royal escort to save his imprisoned father, not realizing the mission involved killing families. Young Torren wanted him restrained. Merrick argued that Othmar built loyalty from private desperation. Punishing the desperate would simply provide the prince with more recruits. Torren supported Merrick. His younger self demanded to know when he had become merciful. Torren answered that it happened shortly after discovering where 32 years of efficient cruelty eventually led. They released Brass after he swore to testify. 5 more royal guards followed, each revealing a debt, threat, or captive relative used to secure obedience. Othmar's army was not built from devotion. It was a chain of hostages disguised as a command structure. Sabine examined Torren after the gorge. His injured arm was healing, but he could not remember which hand Merrick used for writing. Merrick answered left, then suddenly doubted his own reply. Eloin confirmed her son had always written with his right hand. Merrick searched for the memory and found only a blank room where years of childhood lessons should have been. Torren assumed the return had damaged him. Sabine disagreed. Merrick's earlier memories had been clear before Torren took control repeatedly during the fort battle. She tested them with questions. Merrick remembered Nessa's hatred of green, Vara's wooden birds, and his mother's fox gloves, but could no longer recall his father's voice. Every answer shook him more than a wound. He had survived execution only to discover another man was slowly replacing him from the inside. Torren withdrew from control immediately. The body collapsed because Merrick had not expected to receive every muscle at once, and he landed face first in the same mud he had used to humiliate Grieve. Cauldron offered assistance after finishing his laugh. Sabine informed him that compassion delayed by laughter was still medically detectable. Merrick pushed himself upright and refused Torren's help. He accused the Grand Marshal of keeping the body because life as a young man offered everything his old age had lost. Torren denied it, but Merrick showed him flashes of emotions he had tried to hide: joy at seeing Sabine young, relief at holding a sword again, and shameful comfort when others mistook him for Merrick. Young Torren overheard enough to understand. He drew his sword and demanded that the older soul leave Merrick before there was nothing left of the rightful owner. Torren admitted he did not know how. The meridian clock had caused their collision, and only the clock might separate them, but it remained beneath the royal palace under Othmar's control. Merrick proposed a new rule. Torren could advise but would take control only with explicit permission. If he violated that boundary, Merrick would reveal their secret to the temple and risk exorcism. Torren agreed. Young Torren demanded an oath, and Torren swore on Sabine's life before realizing that using her life as currency was precisely the kind of habit he needed to abandon. Sabine made him repeat the oath using his own dignity. Torren complained that the collateral was smaller. She replied that this was why it suited the risk. With Valen captive and the royal guards divided, they needed a destination Othmar could not seize quietly. Commander Pell had mentioned the independent city of Dunmarrow, governed by veterans and protected by a public tribunal. Dunmarrow lay 2 days south. Othmar would reach the capital's relay towers within hours, meaning every road and checkpoint would soon carry descriptions of the fugitives. Merrick proposed entering openly under the banner of a funeral procession for soldiers killed at Glass Gorge. Othmar could search hidden travelers, but interfering with military dead would anger every veteran between the mountains and the city. Cauldron looked at the empty coffins recovered from the engineer wagon and asked who would play the deceased. Young Torren stared at his silver cape, and everyone reached the same answer. The captain refused to spend another journey pretending to be dead. Sabine noted that he had already practiced lying still during strategy meetings, so the role required little preparation. By evening, their procession carried 3 sealed coffins, injured royal guards, and Greaves captured papers. Young Torren rode inside the lead coffin, complaining through an air hole whenever Cauldron struck a bump. At the first checkpoint, royal inspectors demanded to open every coffin. Merrick presented Rellan as the escort commander, bound beneath a cloak with Sabine's numbing medicine preventing him from speaking clearly. The inspector asked why Rellan appeared furious. Sabine said grief affected every patient differently, particularly those who had recently developed an allergy to treason. A muffled sneeze came from young Torren's coffin. Merrick bowed his head and explained that the dead captain's spirit remained upset about administrative delays. The inspector stepped away from the coffin. Cauldron whispered that superstition had accomplished what rank could not, and young Torren sneezed again purely for revenge. The procession passed 2 checkpoints, but at the third they found wanted posters already nailed to the gate. Othmar had described Merrick as a sorcerer who stole the Grand Marshal's soul and controlled young Torren like a puppet. The lie contained enough truth to be devastating. Villagers recoiled from Merrick, and several soldiers made protective signs when he approached. Othmar had also offered 10,000 crowns for Sabine, claiming she performed forbidden procedures on captured officers. Cauldron complained that his own reward was only 200. Sabine said the amount appeared professionally accurate. Cauldron asked whether she meant his low strategic value, and she suggested accepting whichever explanation protected his feelings. Merrick refused to hide from the villagers. He opened the wagons and showed them the royal guards he had saved, allowing Brass to describe the attempted rockslide in his own words. Some listeners believed him, others did not. Torren learned that exposing a lie once did not erase fear, especially when the truth sounded stranger. An elderly baker threw a rotten apple at Merrick. Young Torren emerged from his coffin, caught it, and announced that the terrifying puppet had just spent 2 days preventing him from dying. The crowd stared at the supposedly dead captain. Young Torren bit into the apple, immediately regretted the decision, and declared that resurrection tasted worse than expected. Laughter broke the panic. The baker apologized and offered fresh bread, proving that public terror could sometimes be defeated by one foolish man eating spoiled fruit with sufficient confidence. The procession grew as veterans and villagers joined them. By the time Dunmarrow's walls appeared, nearly 300 witnesses marched behind Merrick instead of hiding from him. Othmar had anticipated a secret arrival, not a public one. His agents at the gate could not arrest the group without starting a riot beneath the tribunal's windows. Dunmarrow's governor, Marshal Edric Say, received them in the Hall of Names. He was 80, missing one eye, and unimpressed by both versions of Torren. Edric had trained Torren as a cadet. His first words to young Torren were that the silver cape remained an offense against military judgment. Torren laughed inside Merrick's mind. Young Torren asked whether everyone in the future conspired against the cape. Sabine promised that history would eventually judge it with appropriate cruelty. The public tribunal began before sunset. Rellan, Brass, the rescued guards, Eloan, and the Glass Gorge survivors testified beneath truth bells that rang when witnesses knowingly contradicted themselves. Greaves' journal and the prince's letters were accepted as evidence, but the copied statement bearing Sabine's handwriting prevented a simple judgment. Othmar's talent for poisoning truth followed them even in his absence. A palace advocate named Lecter Bane arrived by relay horse. He argued that Merrick's possession made every statement unreliable and demanded the temple examine him immediately. Edric asked whether the crown now considered survival a medical condition. Bane replied that 2 souls in 1 body constituted an offense against natural law. Merrick stood before the tribunal and voluntarily revealed Torren's presence. The hall erupted, but he refused to let Othmar control the truth by revealing only its frightening pieces. He described his execution, Torren's return, their conflict, and the memories he had begun losing. He did not ask the tribunal to trust Torren. He asked them to recognize that his own choices had saved the soldiers. Bane called him a puppet. Merrick surrendered control completely, and invited the advocate to ask questions only he could answer. Bane presented childhood records stolen from the Dane home. Merrick identified every teacher, neighbor, and mistake, including the time he blamed a broken window on a chicken that lived 3 streets away. Rellan confirmed the incident, and added that the chicken had possessed a stronger defense than the royal advocate. The truth bells remained silent while the hall laughed. Bane then asked for Merrick's father's final words. Merrick reached for them and found nothing. The silence became evidence against him. Bane claimed Torren had already consumed the memory, and would soon erase Merrick entirely. Torren begged for permission to speak. Merrick refused, determined to face the accusation himself even while terror closed around him. Sabine intervened with her medical findings. She explained that memory loss followed forced transfers of control, not simple coexistence, and could stop if Torren honored the new boundary. Bane asked whether she could guarantee recovery. Sabine answered honestly that she could not, surrendering the easy reassurance Othmar expected her to invent. The truth bells remained silent. Her uncertainty carried more weight than the advocate's polished certainty, and the tribunal voted to protect Merrick while studying the meridian clock. Edric issued warrants for Grieve and Valen, granted sanctuary to the Dane family, and summoned King Roderick to review evidence against his son in open court. The hall erupted in relief. Young Torren gripped Merrick's shoulder, Cauldron demanded a reward matching Sabine's, and Rellan cried where her daughters could pretend not to see. Torren remained silent inside. This victory belonged to Merrick's honesty, not his command, and the distinction filled him with pride untainted by possession. That night, Dunmarrow celebrated the tribunal ruling. For the first time, Merrick ate dinner at a table with his family instead of watching them through shared memories. Torren withdrew as far as their bond allowed. He listened while Nessa mocked Merrick's prison beard, Vara described the bird she wanted to carve, and Eloan saved the largest piece of pie for her son. Merrick invited Torren to share the taste. Torren refused, fearing even a moment of sensation might take something else from him. Merrick insisted. He said boundaries existed to protect life, not prevent it, and allowed Torren one bite of apple pie through their shared senses. Torren had eaten at royal banquets across 7 nations, yet that simple bite nearly broke him. It tasted like the home he had spent an entire lifetime postponing. Sabine found him crying beside the window. Merrick gave Torren permission to speak, then retreated enough to offer privacy without surrendering control. Torren apologized for the future in which he had kept her waiting. Sabine said she refused to punish him for events she had not lived, but she would judge every choice he made now. He asked whether there could ever be a life for them if he escaped Merrick's body. Sabine answered that she cared for Torren, but Merrick's survival came first because love built on another man's erasure would be another form of conquest. Torren agreed. Her answer hurt, and healed him at the same time, because the woman he loved had chosen the principle he was finally learning. A bell rang from the tribunal tower just before midnight. It rang once for fire, twice for invasion, and 13 times for the death of a protected witness. They raced to the Hall of Names and found Valen's cell empty. Grieve lay unconscious beside an open passage, branded with the royal falcon as if the prince had marked failed property. Governor Edric stood beneath the truth bells, gripping a wound at his side. He revealed that Lector Bane had activated a meridian crystal hidden inside the copied medical statement. The crystal had recorded every tribunal confession and transmitted it to Othmar. Their public victory had given the prince the names of every ally, every witness, and the exact limits of Torren's control. Bane appeared on the upper gallery holding a second crystal. He announced that Othmar no longer needed Merrick dead. He needed Torren desperate enough to abandon him willingly. Royal agents set fire to the archive. Flames climbed the wooden shelves containing Grieve's letters, witness records, and the summons meant for King Roderick. Young Torren pursued Bane while Cauldron and the guards formed a bucket line. Sabine remained with Edric, leaving Merrick to choose between saving evidence and catching the agent. Torren recognized the dilemma as Othmar's design. In the old timeline, he would chase the enemy commander and trust subordinates to protect documents. Merrick chose the archive instead. He and Nessa dragged sealed evidence chests through the smoke, while Vara opened sealing vents using knowledge from her father's workshop. Bane escaped across the rooftops, but young Torren returned carrying the meridian crystal he had cut from the Advocate's cloak. For once, he had abandoned pursuit before pride led him into a trap. They saved most of the testimony, yet the royal summons and the original letters burned. Edric survived, but the tribunal could no longer compel the king without authenticated seals. The captured crystal activated in Merrick's hand. Future Othmar's voice offered Torren a private bargain: enter the meridian chamber beneath the capital, and the clock would place him inside his younger body. The price was simple. Young Torren's soul would be displaced into the dying future body, while Merrick would keep what remained of his own life. Othmar had designed an answer that appeared to save Merrick and give Torren everything he had lost: youth, rank, Sabine, and his rightful face, at the cost of condemning only the arrogant young man Torren understood better than anyone. Then Merrick discovered another memory missing. He could no longer remember his mother's face, even while she stood
Merrick
3 feet away calling his name. The blue thread on her sleeve, and the way her left eyebrow lifted whenever she feared one of her children was lying. Yet the face connecting those details remained an empty circle, and panic stole the strength from his knees. Eloan caught him before he fell. When Merrick confessed what he had forgotten, she did not demand recognition or pretend not to be hurt. She placed his hand against her cheek and said a face was only one doorway into a lifetime of knowing someone. She reminded him of burnt winter bread, fox-shaped gloves, and the songs she sang during thunderstorms. Each detail formed a brief image, but the image dissolved whenever Torren moved closer within their shared mind. Torren retreated until he could barely hear the room. Merrick's memory sharpened slightly, confirming that their bond had become unstable after the meridian crystal activated. Sabine examined the crystal beneath a glass bowl. Its backward chimes matched the sound from Torren's death, and hairline fractures across its surface pulsed whenever Torren tried to control Merrick's body. She concluded that future Othmar had tuned the device to Torren's soul. The crystal was now pulling him toward the meridian clock, dragging Merrick's memories away as friction between two identities. Young Torren told them to destroy it. Sabine warned that breaking the crystal might sever Torren violently, killing Merrick or leaving both minds trapped without control of the body. Cauldron suggested placing it in a box labeled "Terrible Royal Ideas" and throwing the box into the sea. Sabine said the medical value of his proposal was limited, though its emotional accuracy deserved recognition. The crystal chimed again, and future Othmar's voice repeated the bargain. He promised Torren his rightful body, command, youth, and a future where Sabine would never grow old waiting for him. Young Torren asked the question no one else wanted to speak. If accepting saved Merrick and returned Torren to his own flesh, why should they reject it merely because one version of Torren paid the price? The room fell silent. Young Torren had not volunteered to die, but he had recognized the cold arithmetic that Grand Marshal Torren once used to justify every sacrifice. Torren emerged just enough to answer. He said the bargain was exactly what his younger self would have chosen in the old timeline. One expendable life traded for a commander considered more valuable. That reasoning had built Othmar's empire. It had also executed Merrick, abandoned Sabine, and taught thousands of soldiers that their worth depended on usefulness. Torren rejected the offer. He would not murder his younger self to correct the future, even if refusing cost him every hope of wearing his own face again. The meridian crystal cracked. Othmar's recorded voice lost its calm and warned that Merrick had fewer than 7 days before his identity disappeared completely. Torren answered that Othmar had made one mistake. He understood the man Torren had been, but not the people now teaching him to become someone else. The crystal went dark. Young Torren looked away, overwhelmed by gratitude he lacked the maturity to express without sounding angry. Cauldron rescued him by asking whether two Torrens rejecting each other meant the Silver Cape was finally available. Both versions threatened him at once, restoring a reassuring degree of normal hostility. Governor Edric ordered Dunmarrow sealed while his archivists recovered surviving records. However, Royal Relay Towers already declared the tribunal corrupt and claimed Edric had been murdered by Merrick during the fire. Edric read the announcement, while very much alive. He admitted that death improved his official reputation but objected to the portrait, which gave him 2 functioning eyes and far too much hair. Othmar had turned Dunmarrow into a rebel city overnight. Grain caravans were redirected, bank accounts frozen, and nearby garrisons ordered to surround the walls within 3 days. If the city sheltered the fugitives, thousands of civilians would suffer. If it expelled them, Othmar would capture every witness before the truth reached King Roderick. Torren urged evacuation, then stopped himself and asked Merrick's permission to offer a plan. The small act mattered. Merrick could not remember his mother's face, but he remembered exactly why Torren was finally learning to ask. Merrick granted permission for advice, not control. Torren proposed leaving publicly, drawing the siege away while Edric distributed copies of the testimony through veteran networks beyond royal relay lines. Young Torren objected that Othmar expected flight. Merrick agreed, which made the obvious route useful as long as their true destination appeared impossible. They would announce an escape toward the Western Republics, then travel east inside the Royal Mail system toward the capital. Rather than avoiding Othmar's network, they would let his own couriers carry them beneath the palace walls. Vara explained that relay coaches use sealed wheel compartments for diplomatic records. Her father had designed the locks, and she could enlarge 2 compartments without changing the carriage's exterior balance. Cauldron counted the group and asked which 7 people would fit into space intended for letters. Vara measured his shoulders and said the engineering problem became easier if they left the widest source of unnecessary commentary behind. The counterplan required 3 deceptions. Edric would stage an argument and expel them publicly. Commander Pell, if still alive, would lead a false convoy west. Sabine would submit a forged report claiming Torren's soul was weakening. Othmar knew Sabine's handwriting, but this time she would deliberately include 3 mistakes copied from the document his agents had forged. The prince's certainty and stolen knowledge would authenticate their lie for them. Merrick asked how they could restore his memories after entering the capital. Sabine had no cure, but she had discovered that memories strengthened whenever the people involved retold them with physical anchors. His identity could be preserved outside his mind, in Eloan's stories, Vara's carvings, Nessa's letters, official testimony, and every life he had changed since surviving the execution. Eloan called it a family. Torren called it a distributed memory defense, which caused Sabine to accuse him of turning affection into military vocabulary so it would stop frightening him. They spent the night building Merrick's anchors. Eloan described his birth during a thunderstorm. Vara carved the toy bird he repaired for her. Nessa wrote down every embarrassing childhood mistake she could remember. Nessa's list reached 12 pages. Merrick protested that several incidents were exaggerated, especially the chicken trial, but the argument itself restored the memory of hiding behind a flour barrel after breaking the window. Sabine recorded Merrick's recent choices: saving young Torren, rescuing Valen, protecting soldiers at Glass Gorge, and refusing to let Torren claim his family's affection. Young Torren added a statement admitting Merrick had defeated him twice, once in the courtyard and once by choosing better command at the gorge. Writing the confession caused him visible physical pain. Cauldron offered to document a third defeat involving the coffin. Young Torren chased him around the archive until Edric threatened to list both men as structural hazards. At dawn, Merrick reviewed the anchors. Eloan's face remained blurred, but he could feel the shape of her love around the missing image, like warmth outlining a door in darkness. Torren understood that identity was not a collection of private memories guarded alone. It survived because other people carried pieces willingly, the opposite of Othmar, who preserved himself by stealing the future. Edric staged the expulsion in Dunmarrow's central square. He shouted that Merrick had endangered the city, while Merrick accused the governor of resembling an underfed pirate with municipal authority. The performance convinced royal spies because either insult required acting. Edric banished the group west before thousands of witnesses and ordered the gates closed behind them. A convoy departed beneath rebel banners. Othmar's scouts followed it, unaware that Commander Pell, alive after escaping the first ambush, wore Merrick's cloak and led volunteers skilled at disappearing in mountain passes. The real group entered an underground printing house beneath the eastern wall. Veterans there reproduced the tribunal testimony faster than royal agents could burn it, using presses once built for army ration labels. Cauldron examined a page exposing Othmar's crimes and complained that his name appeared only in a footnote. The printer offered to enlarge it if he agreed to be listed under avoidable complications. That evening, Vara hid Merrick, Sabine, young Torren, Cauldron, and herself inside 2 modified mail compartments. Eloan and Nessa remained in Dumero under Edric's protection, a separation Merrick accepted only after 3 arguments and 1 maternal order. Before the compartment closed, Eloan pressed the fox glove into Merrick's hand. He still could not see her face clearly, but he recognized the exact pressure of her embrace and promised to return with his own mind intact. The Royal Mail coach passed inspection because its seal belonged to Lecter Bane. Young Torren had cut it from the Meridian crystal casing without realizing the metal served as a courier credential. For the first 6 hours, no one spoke. Then Cauldron whispered that his left leg had become politically opposed to his right leg, and Sabine threatened to resolve the dispute through amputation. Merrick nearly laughed loud enough to expose them. Torren felt the joy without taking control, proving shared emotion did not cause memory loss when ownership remained respected. At each relay station, royal couriers discussed Othmar's latest proclamations. The prince claimed young Torren had died, Merrick had stolen his appearance, and Dunmero was building an army of possessed veterans. The lies grew more absurd because absurdity encouraged people to stop examining details. A stable accusation could be disproved. 10 contradictory terrors exhausted the public until obedience became easier than thought. Yet printed tribunal pages had reached the same stations. Stable hands hid copies beneath saddles, cooks passed them inside bread baskets, and soldiers quietly compared them with royal orders. Othmar controlled the official future, but Merrick's truth was traveling through ordinary hands too numerous to threaten individually. On the second night, the coach stopped outside a burned village. Othmar's soldiers had punished residents for giving food to Pel's false convoy, turning Torren's diversion into the suffering he feared. Merrick blamed himself. Torren refused to comfort him with the lie that command could avoid every consequence. Instead, he said responsibility meant changing the plan after seeing its cost. They left the mail coach to help. Sabine treated burns and smoke injuries, Vara repaired the village pump, and young Torren distributed royal travel money while pretending not to notice Cauldron recording his generosity for future blackmail. Merrick spoke publicly, telling villagers the false convoy had been his decision and offering them the choice to expose him. The mayor refused the reward, saying Othmar had already taught them what royal promises were worth. The delay cost 12 hours and allowed a patrol to close in, but it gained something Othmar never calculated. 20 villagers volunteered to carry testimony along separate roads toward the capital. When the group returned to the coach, Merrick remembered Eloan's face for 3 full seconds. Choosing responsibility over efficiency had strengthened the person he wanted to remain. 3 days later, the capital's black walls rose beyond wheat fields crowded with refugees. Othmar had accelerated future policies, manufacturing a border crisis to justify emergency authority before King Roderick could question him. Thousands waited at the gates while royal inspectors searched every wagon. The mail coach bypassed the line through a private tunnel, carrying the fugitives directly into the administrative quarter. Their compartment opened inside the royal dead letter office, a warehouse where undeliverable messages gathered beneath dust. The clerk awaiting them was Brast's imprisoned father, Alden Sorn, whom Commander Pel's network had secretly freed. Alden had spent 20 years maintaining palace clocks. He confirmed the Meridian chamber lay below the throne room and required 3 keys: royal blood, the clock keeper's seal, and a command spoken by someone who had already died. Young Torren pointed at Merrick. Merrick pointed internally at Torren. Cauldron observed that, for once, their unusual population problem qualified them perfectly for an administrative requirement. Othmar possessed royal blood and the clock keeper's seal. Torren supplied the dead command, but entering the chamber still required tricking the prince into opening it himself. Sabine's forged medical report had already reached him. According to Alden, Othmar believed Torren's soul would collapse within 48 hours and had ordered Merrick captured alive near the western border. Their disguise remained intact. The prince was searching in precisely the wrong direction, but future Othmar's memories would warn him the moment events diverged too far from anything he recognized. Alden revealed a second danger. The clock did not merely transmit memory. Every use overrode part of history stored inside it. Othmar's repeated messages were erasing records of alternative choices, making his preferred future increasingly difficult to escape. To restore free possibility, they had to reverse the clock while thousands of people simultaneously remembered a truth Othmar had erased. One witness would be overwritten, a city speaking together could resist. The tribunal pages became more than evidence. They were the anchors needed to prevent history itself from accepting Othmar's lie. Their plan divided into 4 fronts. Edric's printers would flood the capital, Pell would rally frontier veterans, Sabine would reach the king, and Merrick would enter the Meridian Chamber with both Torrens. Young Torren demanded the palace infiltration role. Torren reminded him that Othmar knew every reckless entrance he had ever attempted, including the laundry chute used during the East Wing scandal. Sabine asked what happened in the East Wing. Both Torrens refused to answer, establishing the first secret they willingly shared. Vara proposed entering through the abandoned heating conduits built by her father. They led beneath the throne room because royal architects trusted noble blueprints more than the workers who actually understood the walls. Before moving, Merrick recorded a message for Loan in case his memories vanished. He described her face using every recovered detail, then admitted that recognition mattered less than the choice to keep loving her. Torren recorded his own message. He apologized to Merrick without asking for forgiveness and promised that if only one soul could leave the chamber, it would be the man whose body had been stolen twice. Merrick heard the promise and pretended not to. Trust had grown between them, but trusting Torren to sacrifice himself felt dangerously close to accepting another decision made without permission. The group entered the heating network after midnight. Soot covered young Torren's silver cape within minutes, finally improving it according to unanimous vote. Cauldron became stuck between 2 pipes. Vara explained that the conduit met all military width standards, meaning his ego was the obstruction rather than his shoulders. They reached a grate overlooking the Hall of Petitions. Below, Othmar presided over emergency court, while King Roderick sat pale and silent behind a curtain. Othmar announced that rebels had poisoned the king and requested temporary sovereign authority. The same physician who signed the diagnosis wore the black falcon mark beneath his collar. Sabine realized Roderick's illness resembled the slow poison used against Torren in the future, adjusted to weaken rather than kill. Othmar was rehearsing his eventual betrayal 3 decades early. Torren asked Merrick for control so he could rush the chamber. Merrick refused. Saving the king required patience, and the request itself proved how easily old instincts returned under fear. Torren accepted the refusal. The pain of waiting became evidence that his promise mattered precisely when obedience felt unbearable. Sabine and Alden separated toward the royal apartments. Vara guided Merrick, young Torren, and Cauldron downward, carrying Bane's seal and the fractured meridian crystal. At the first vault door, the seal worked. At the second, a guard recognized young Torren despite soot, wanted posters, and the improved absence of silver shine. Young Torren stepped forward before weapons were drawn, and announced he had captured Merrick personally. He accused Cauldron of being an accomplice and slapped shackles around his lieutenant's wrists. Cauldron objected that the performance seemed unnecessarily enthusiastic. Young Torren whispered that he had waited years for a lawful excuse. The guards escorted them toward Othmar instead of the chamber, threatening the entire plan. Merrick asked Torren for advice without yielding control. Torren suggested exploiting rank. Young Torren loudly refused to hand a soul-stealing sorcerer to anyone below royal blood, insulting the guards' clearance until pride forced them to summon the prince. Othmar entered the lower hall alone, smiling at the scene he believed his memories had promised. Young Torren delivering Merrick in chains, desperate to save his own soul. He praised the captain's wisdom and offered immediate restoration inside the Meridian Chamber. Young Torren knelt, presenting the fractured crystal while keeping his face lowered to hide disgust. Othmar used his blood and the clock keeper's seal to open the hidden door. Ancient mechanisms turned beneath the palace, and 12 backward chimes rolled through the capital. The moment the doorway opened, Cauldron removed his shackles with the key Vara had hidden inside them. Young Torren struck both guards with the flat of his sword, and Merrick stepped past the stunned prince. Othmar recovered quickly. He ordered the chamber to reject Merrick, but the clock recognized Torren's dead soul and opened wider, revealing thousands of suspended crystal memories spinning like stars. Young Torren informed Othmar that his future knowledge had one serious weakness. It came from a timeline where Torren Voss never learned to kneel convincingly. Cauldron added that the performance still needed work. Young Torren kicked him through the doorway, preserving their friendship in its most honest form. Othmar drew a hidden blade and drove it into Merrick's side before the chamber sealed. The wound was serious but survivable. The greater damage came when the clock seized Torren's soul and began pulling it out. As Merrick collapsed beneath the spinning memories, Othmar entered behind him and revealed the final trap. The clock could separate the two souls, but only the one who surrendered the body first would be torn upward as a stream of pale light, while Merrick remained on the floor, one hand pressed against his wounded side. Between them appeared two crystal doors, one leading back into Merrick's body and the other opening onto a vision of young Torren collapsing 32 years in the future. The sight was more cruel than any blade because both exits wore familiar faces. In one doorway, Merrick saw his own hands growing steady as Torren vanished. In the other, Torren watched the young captain inherit a dying body surrounded by enemies who would call his confusion treason. The mechanism offered no neutral ground, only two carefully polished forms of theft. Othmar had not created a fair test. He had transformed their compassion into opposing weapons and expected guilt to select the victim for him. Othmar explained that the clock recognized only one rightful claimant to a stolen life. If Torren surrendered Merrick's body first, he would be transferred into his younger self and live. If Merrick surrendered first, Torren would keep the body while Merrick disappeared without pain. Othmar described the rule with the patience of a teacher explaining arithmetic to slow children. The first voluntary surrender would become a binding command that even royal blood could not reverse. He claimed this protected the clock from rival spirits, fighting forever over one vessel. Merrick noticed that every safeguard still assumed people desired ownership above relationship, revealing the worldview of the rulers who commissioned it. Like the empire outside, the machine could imagine competition, obedience, and sacrifice, but possessed no language for consent freely shared. Merrick heard the word, without pain, and laughed weakly. Every tyrant in history apparently believed murder became civilized when accompanied by comfortable furniture and careful wording. Othmar's future self had improved the language of cruelty while learning nothing about mercy. He reminded Othmar that comfort had decorated every cell where his family was held. Guards had served warm soup, supplied clean blankets, and explained that cooperation would prevent unpleasant consequences. None of those details changed the locked doors. A painless disappearance was still disappearance, and a beautiful false future remained captivity. Merrick had already allowed officials to define his silence as confession once. He would not let a machine define surrender as mercy merely because its crystal voice sounded more civilized than grief. Torren ordered Merrick to surrender. Merrick called him a hypocrite, because the man who had finally learned not to command other people's sacrifices was now trying to disguise his own sacrifice as an order. Their dispute carried no hatred now, which made it harder. Torren wanted to protect the man he had wronged. Merrick wanted to preserve the man who had finally learned why the wrong mattered. Each recognized the other's sacrifice as sincere and therefore unacceptable. Othmar listened like a gambler certain both players would eventually choose the move he had priced into the table. He did not understand that their arguments were no longer attempts to win control. They were proof that neither considered the other expendable. They argued inside the storm of memories while Othmar watched with satisfaction. He had built the trap around their guilt. Torren could not accept another stolen life, and Merrick could not let a repentant man die after giving him a second chance. Torren finally recognized the design because it resembled the orders he had written during hopeless campaigns. He would present two terrible options, remove every third possibility through urgency, then praise the subordinate willing to pay the cost. Soldiers called those choices necessary because questioning the frame felt like cowardice while lives were at risk. Othmar had studied that method from Torren's own future. Now the former Grand Marshal stood inside the perfect expression of his worst lesson and understood why Merrick refused to obey it. Young Torren struck the sealed chamber door from outside, demanding entry. Cauldron helped by shouting tactical advice consisting mostly of, "Hit it harder," while Vara searched the surrounding mechanism for the emergency release her father would have installed. Beyond the door, the captain's voice cracked with anger. He did not know whether the old soul was his future, his father, or a warning wearing his face, but he knew the chamber was trying to erase someone in his name. Cauldron struck the stone until his knuckles bled, then wrapped them in a torn sleeve and continued. Vara ignored both men's noise, tracing gears with blackened fingers. Their efforts mattered because the choice inside was never truly isolated. Othmar merely needed Torren and Merrick to believe nobody else could reach them. Othmar raised his hand, and the clock displayed the poison banquet in perfect detail. Torren saw his older body dying beneath the mural, Sabine fighting the guards, and the untouched future still waiting if he chose the first door. The memory projection expanded until the chamber smelled of wine and candle smoke. Torren saw medals polished for the celebration, officers rehearsing praise, and servants unknowingly carrying the cup that would end him. He also saw details hidden during his death. Othmar checking the meridian crystal beneath his sleeve, Valen sealing the doors, and Bane exchanging the antidote for a second vial. The banquet had never been one murder. It was the final movement of a machine built from thousands of smaller obediences. The prince promised to send him back 1 minute before the poison entered his blood. Torren could expose Othmar, preserve his command, marry Sabine, and enjoy 32 years with every mistake already mapped. Othmar painted the rescued future carefully. Torren would arrest every conspirator before the music began, release the secret prisoners, and command reforms with knowledge nobody could challenge. Sabine would receive the proposal she deserved, while fallen soldiers would survive campaigns Torren could now avoid. The offer contained genuine good alongside its poison, making refusal morally painful rather than merely heroic. If Torren rejected it, he also rejected lives he could imagine saving. Othmar trusted that a commander trained to count casualties could never walk away from that arithmetic. For a heartbeat, Torren wanted it with an intensity that frightened him. He imagined walking away from the banquet, holding Sabine's hand, and returning to a home that had never existed. The vision offered not power, but the ordinary happiness he regretted most. In the vision, children ran through the garden Torren had never owned. Sabine placed supper on a table without medical reports, and no messenger interrupted them. He knew the color of the walls, the warmth of afternoon light, and the exact laugh of a daughter who had never existed. Wanting that life did not make him selfish. Pretending the desire was harmless would. Somewhere beyond the scene, Merrick's identity was paying for every beautiful detail, even if the illusion hid the receipt. Merrick felt the longing and told him to take the door. His own memories were already disappearing, and perhaps one complete life was better than 2 damaged ones trapped inside a failing body. Merrick offered himself not from despair but from gratitude, which made Torren's refusal more urgent. He remembered every moment the condemned officer could have allowed him to fail. The dagger at the fort, Greaves' hostage trap, Glass Gorge, and the tribunal. Merrick had repeatedly chosen cooperation without forgetting justice. To accept his disappearance now would transform those generous choices into evidence that generosity invited exploitation. Torren refused to teach that lesson again, even to a man prepared to forgive him. Torren approached the future doorway. Othmar smiled because Grand Marshal Torren Voss had always chosen the outcome with the greatest measurable value, especially when the hidden costs belonged to someone else. The vision responded to Torren's approach by placing the Grand Marshal's ceremonial sword in his hand. Applause filled the false banquet, and every officer who had looked away during his poisoning now swore eternal loyalty. The fantasy understood recognition better than intimacy because it had been constructed from Othmar's memories of him. Future Othmar knew which honors Torren received, which battles he won, and which rooms he commanded. He had never paid enough attention to understand what Torren whispered while dying inches from Sabine's fingers. Then Torren noticed that Sabine in the vision never looked directly at him. She repeated the correct words and accepted his hand, but her expression did not change when he spoke. It was not a future, it was Othmar's memory of what Torren desired. Sabine's wrongness appeared in tiny obedient details. She did not interrupt him, challenge an assumption, or insult the silver decorations chosen for their home. The real Sabine would have opened a window, corrected his posture, and asked why a retired soldier needed 3 maps beside the breakfast table. The copy loved him exactly as he expected to be loved, which meant it did not love him at all. Torren realized that Othmar's ideal future required every person to become predictable furniture around one central will. The clock could transmit stored recollections and erase possibilities, but it could not guarantee a living world. Othmar was offering Torren a beautiful prison assembled from regrets, expecting a soldier to mistake an accurate map for an actual home. He examined the doorway instead of the images and found seams where separate memories had been joined. The garden came from a governor's estate, the children from soldiers he once rescued, and Sabine's dress from the night she treated him after Red Hollow. The clock had assembled desire from stolen fragments in the same way Othmar assembled loyalty from threatened families. Neither creation possessed a free choice. Recognizing the construction weakened it, and the sunset flickered like paint exposed to rain. Torren turned away. He said the Sabine he loved would never accept happiness purchased with Merrick's erasure, and any future that required her to become less herself was merely another conquest wearing her face. Torren's rejection did not mean abandoning happiness. It meant refusing Othmar's authority to define happiness as a reward granted after obedience. He wanted Sabine, children, ordinary mornings, and a table surrounded by people who could disagree with him. Those desires belonged to a future they would build, not a memory machine's contract. When he spoke, the false Sabine finally turned toward him, smiled with genuine defiance for one impossible instant, and shattered with the rest of the borrowed scene. Othmar's smile vanished. The future emperor remembered a Torren who could be controlled through duty, pride, or regret. He possessed no memory of a Torren willing to reject all 3. For the first time, Othmar looked young. The confidence imported from his future slipped, revealing a frightened prince who had spent years receiving instructions from the man he was supposed to become. Every message had promised that uncertainty could be eliminated if he followed the correct sequence. Torren's unrecorded choice proved the sequence had already failed. Othmar had not mastered time. He had allowed an older version of himself to colonize every decision before he could discover who else he might have been. Torren moved toward Merrick instead, but he did not enter the body. He surrendered every claim to command, sensation, rank, and survival, leaving Merrick in sole control even as the clock warned that an unanchored soul would be erased. Surrendering command felt like removing armor fused to Torren's skin. He released the reflex to reach for Merrick's eyes, hands, and breath whenever danger appeared. He let go of the belief that experience automatically created entitlement. As each claim vanished, he became less powerful inside the chamber, and more honest than he had been at the height of his empire. The clock called the condition erasure. Torren understood it as the first choice that belonged entirely to the person he wanted to become. Merrick immediately surrendered his claim to Torren. He declared that the body belonged to him, which meant the decision to share it was also his right. Consent could not exist if the clock recognized ownership only when it separated people. Merrick's answer came from ownership correctly understood. His body was not a fortress that required Torren's permanent exile. It was a life whose doors only he could open. He chose to offer refuge without transferring the deed. That distinction had guided every boundary since Dunmeril, and the clock's creators had never encoded it because kings rarely imagined possession could include the right to share. Merrick's decision was neither submission nor sacrifice. It was hospitality extended freely to someone who had finally learned to knock. Both crystal doors shattered. The meridian mechanism had been designed to resolve competing claims, but neither soul was competing. Their mutual refusal created a choice absent from Othmar's imported future. Cracks raced across the crystal doors, releasing scenes of lives discarded by royal decisions. Farmers who might have become scholars, soldiers who might have returned home, and children erased by manufactured wars appeared around them. The chamber had stored every path Othmar eliminated while pretending only one necessary future existed. Torren and Merrick's mutual choice reopened those paths conceptually before the mechanism opened them physically. The world had never lacked alternatives. Power had merely hidden them until obedience looked like fate. Thousands of suspended memories began spinning backward. The clock searched for a history capable of containing both men without stealing a living body, opening discarded possibilities that Othmar had overwritten each time he sent knowledge into the past. The memories moved like a night sky collapsing upward. Some showed Torren dying young, others showed Merrick becoming a teacher, and one showed Othmar abandoning the throne to study clocks anonymously. None was a prophecy. They were possibilities made real enough to guide but never certain enough to command. Torren finally understood the proper use of future knowledge, not as an answer that removed choice, but as a warning that expanded it. That realization stripped Othmar's stolen memories of their greatest advantage. Othmar rushed toward the central dial. He ordered the machine to restore his chosen timeline, but Merrick caught his wrist and reminded him that royal blood opened the chamber. It did not make the prince its owner. Othmar's fingers closed around the dial with desperate strength. He shouted royal commands in the old ceremonial language, then in the private cipher future Othmar had taught him. The mechanism rejected both because the chamber was now responding to consent rather than blood. For years, the prince had mistaken privileged access for ownership. Merrick's hand on his wrist forced him to confront the simplest humiliation. The clock could hear him perfectly, and had still decided not to obey. The wound in Merrick's side weakened him, and Othmar struck him against the dial. Torren remained outside the body by his own oath, unable to intervene unless Merrick gave permission. Pain spread from Merrick's wound, blurring the edges of Eloan's restored face. Torren felt the instinct to seize control and crush the prince before another strike landed. Honoring the oath while Merrick suffered was harder than making it when everyone stood safely in Dunmarrow. The boundary had meaning only now, when violating it might produce an immediate tactical advantage. Torren remained outside, proving to Merrick and himself that protection without permission could become another elegant name for possession. Othmar mocked that limitation. He said Torren had reduced the greatest commander in history to a polite ghost waiting for authorization, while a wounded clerk fought a prince alone. Othmar circled them, describing every battle Torren would lose without direct control. He predicted Merrick's slower reaction, Vara's capture, and Sabine's death above the chamber. Each threat carried details from the imported future, but those details belonged to people behaving as they once had. Torren answered none of them. He waited for Merrick to choose, accepting uncertainty as the price of respecting another human being. That patience denied Othmar the predictable panic he needed more effectively than any counterattack. Merrick answered that Othmar still misunderstood strength. Then he asked Torren for advice, not control, and used the Grand Marshal's knowledge to redirect the prince's next strike without surrendering a single movement. Merrick's request transformed decades of mastery into a resource rather than a throne. Torren described angles, timing, and balance. Merrick decided which knowledge fit his own body and discarded the rest. Their cooperation resembled a conversation at combat speed, full of corrections and trust. Othmar could remember every technique Torren had personally used, but he could not predict which advice Merrick would reject. The condemned officer's independence, once treated as an obstacle, became the variable that finally made the Grand Marshal's experience useful without making it sovereign. Torren identified Othmar's forward balance, Merrick chose the response, and together they sent the prince stumbling into a column of his own preserved memories. Crystal scenes burst around him, exposing orders, threats, and the poisoned banquet he had tried to hide. The impact scattered crystal memories across the floor like broken mirrors. In one fragment, Greaves signed the false order. In another, Othmar rehearsed grief before poisoning his father. Merrick forced the prince to look at each scene, not because shame would redeem him, but because denial had always protected his cruelty. Othmar kicked the fragments away and insisted possible futures were not evidence. Merrick answered that the present wound in his side and the captives upstairs were real enough to begin with. Outside the chamber, Vara found her father's maker mark beneath the western hinge. The emergency release required simultaneous pressure on two distant plates, a safety rule created so no royal could seal workers inside alone. Vara worked without waiting for anyone's permission. She recognized her father's habit of placing service channels beside decorative royal crests, knowing nobles inspected beauty while workers inspected function. Behind one golden emblem she found the manual brake, deliberately simple enough for a frightened apprentice to use. Her father had spent his life building locks for powerful people, but every design contained a quiet promise that no mechanism should become a tomb. That principle now stood between the Empire and permanent control of time. Young Torren and Cauldron took opposite positions. Cauldron counted to 3, pressed on 2, and blamed military anticipation when the mechanism shocked them both. Othmar's projected armor grew brighter whenever fear spread through the palace. It drew strength from remembered salutes, bowed heads, and officers obeying orders they doubted. Merrick realized they could not break it merely by striking harder, because violence confirmed the prince's belief that power determined truth. They had to make obedience visible as a choice. Each witness who spoke, each guard who lowered a weapon, and each citizen who laughed at royal certainty removed another layer more effectively than steel. On the second attempt, they synchronized. The chamber door opened far enough for Vara and Cauldron to enter, while young Torren remained outside to hold back royal guards flooding the lower hall. Cauldron recovered beneath the serving bowl and discovered it reflected the clock's light into hidden inscriptions above the dial. The accident revealed names carved by generations of maintenance workers whose labor had been erased from royal histories. He read them aloud while Vara worked, turning anonymous builders into witnesses across time. Even young Torren, still fighting outside, heard the names through the open mechanism and repeated them. The chamber responded because remembrance was never meant to belong exclusively to kings. That forgotten truth became another weapon against Othmar's manufactured inevitability. Vara saw Merrick bleeding and ran to him, but he ordered her to reach the mechanical core. Their father had designed the outer locks. Only she could understand how his safety systems connected to the meridian dial. Othmar drew power from a future memory of himself as emperor. Golden armor formed around him, not real metal but a projection of authority enforced by everyone who had once obeyed him. Cauldron struck the armor and was thrown across the chamber. He landed inside a memory of a royal banquet, emerged wearing a silver serving bowl as a helmet, and announced that the afterlife had disappointing fashion standards. Othmar attacked Merrick again. Torren offered control, but Merrick refused because every force transfer risked losing another memory. Instead, he permitted Torren to share reflexes one movement at a time, each exchange requested and returned. Their body moved with two kinds of intelligence. Torren recognized patterns from decades of battle, while Merrick rejected the predictable answers Othmar remembered. They fought neither like the Grand Marshal nor the condemned officer, but like a partnership the old timeline had never contained. Othmar's golden armor cracked. Through each fracture appeared a different victim: Greaves' hostages, Brass's father, the poisoned king, Merrick's family, and soldiers sacrificed so the prince could manufacture crises he already knew how to solve. Vara reached the core and discovered the clock was locked to the capital's relay bells. Reversing it required thousands of people to speak and erase truths simultaneously, exactly as Alden had warned. Cauldron activated Bane's meridian crystal and sent a message to the printing network. Unfortunately, his first words were still muffled by the serving bowl, causing veteran stations across the city to receive an urgent request about freeing the kitchen. Vara removed the bowl and made him repeat the message clearly. Cauldron informed Dumero, Commander Pell, and every hidden press that the clock was open and the capital had to remember Merrick Dane aloud. Across the city, tribunal pages appeared from bread carts, saddlebags, workshops, and soldiers' coats. Printers rang handbells while citizens read Merrick's testimony from windows faster than royal patrols could confiscate it. At the western gate, Commander Pell abandoned the false retreat and entered beneath veteran banners. She did not attack the guards. She handed them testimony from the royal soldiers Merrick had saved at Glass Gorge. Brass stood before his former unit and described the rock slide, the prisoner's rescue, and Othmar's order to bury witnesses alive. One by one, soldiers lowered their weapons and repeated Merrick's name. In Dunmerrow, Governor Edric rang the truth bells despite his bandaged wound. Eloan, Nessa, and hundreds of veterans read the tribunal record together, turning a private accusation into a memory carried by an entire city. Within the palace, Sabine reached King Roderick's chamber and confronted the Black Falcon physician. He claimed the king's weakness came from rebels, but she identified the poison by the faint blue stain beneath his fingernails. The physician attempted to destroy his medicine case. Alden blocked the fire with a clockmaker's apron while Sabine used the same serving tray strike she would perform 32 years later, proving certain historical events deserved preservation. King Roderick received the antidote, and woke as the capital bells began repeating Merrick's name. Sabine showed him copies of Greaves' orders, witness statements, and Othmar's forged diagnosis. Roderick struggled to believe his son had poisoned him. Sabine did not demand belief. She asked him to walk downstairs and listen while Othmar attempted to explain the truth to people he could no longer silence. The voices reached the Meridian Chamber through relay bells. Each person remembered a different piece: Merrick's confession, his family, the soldiers he rescued, his command at the gorge, and the prince's attempt to erase him. Merrick's missing memories returned not as private possessions but as gifts carried back by others. Eloin's face appeared first, lined with worry and fierce love, followed by his father's voice teaching him how every lock needed an emergency release. The restored voice gave Merrick the final mechanical answer. He told Vara to turn the central dial counterclockwise while holding both safety levers open, reversing the clock from a weapon of command into an archive of choices. Othmar lunged for Vara. Torren asked permission, Merrick granted it for one heartbeat, and the Grand Marshal delivered a single precise movement that disarmed the prince without taking a life or lingering in control. Merrick immediately reclaimed the body and caught Othmar's falling blade. He broke it across the dial, telling the prince that the future no longer belonged to the man who arrived with the most stolen answers. Vara reversed the clock. Every imported memory tore away from Othmar's mind and projected across the capital, allowing citizens to witness the future banquet where he poisoned Torren after using him for 32 years. Othmar screamed that those events had not happened and therefore could not be crimes. King Roderick entered the chamber and answered that poisoning him in the present was sufficiently real for an arrest. The prince turned to his father with practiced sorrow, claiming the clock had fabricated everything. Then Grieve, carried in underguard from Dumero, identified the Royal Falcon orders and confessed that Othmar had threatened his family as well. Valen tried to support Othmar, but Brast and the Glass Gorge survivors entered behind Pell. Faced with witnesses he had considered expendable, Valen admitted the rockslide operation and surrendered the clockkeeper's seal. Lecter Bane appeared at the rear passage, attempting to escape disguised as a palace clerk. Cauldron recognized him because the clerk carried 3 expensive pens while every real administrator carried 7 and complained about all of them. Bane ran. Young Torren extended one soot-covered boot, sending the advocates sliding across the polished floor into the remains of Othmar's golden armor. Cauldron informed Bane that the maneuver was called Article 7. Nobody knew what that meant anymore, but the goat law had acquired enough prestige to frighten him into remaining still. Othmar ordered the remaining royal guards to defend their future sovereign. No one moved. The imported memories had shown them a ruler who rewarded decades of loyalty with poison whenever admiration became inconvenient. Young Torren removed his silver cape and placed it over Othmar's bound hands like an improvised restraint. He said the garment had finally found a purpose worthy of its reputation. The chamber laughed, and Othmar's authority ended beneath the sound he had spent his life preventing. He had controlled people by isolating their fear. Public ridicule proved they were no longer isolated. Yet the reversed clock began collapsing. Without Othmar's stolen future holding the mechanism together, discarded timelines poured into the central chamber, and Torren's unanchored soul started dissolving among them. Sabine reached for him but touched only light. The clock offered one remaining vessel, an unused version of Torren from a discarded future where he resigned after his first campaign and never became Grand Marshal. That body was 30 years old, healthy, and physically real within the clock's preserved possibility, but accepting it required Torren to surrender every rank, title, military claim, and supernatural memory tied to the future commander's identity. Othmar laughed from the floor. He insisted Torren would never abandon the victories that made him important, because without the Grand Marshal's name he would become an ordinary man with memories no court was required to honor. Torren looked at Merrick, Sabine, young Torren, and the people who had won precisely when he stopped treating command as ownership. He answered that ordinary life was not the punishment Othmar believed it to be. He released the title of Grand Marshal. Battles, formations, and political secrets remained as personal memories, but the clock removed their magical authority, preventing him from using future knowledge as an unquestionable weapon. The discarded body stepped from the crystal light. Torren entered it and fell forward, breathing with his own lungs for the first time since the poison banquet. Sabine caught him before he struck the floor. He looked younger than she remembered and older than the captain beside them, carrying silver at his temples that no 30-year-old body should possess. Merrick stood separately, wounded but entirely himself. He saw Aloan's face clearly in memory, remembered his father's voice, and moved every hand and foot without another consciousness waiting behind the action. Torren and Merrick faced one another in silence. Torren apologized again, this time with his own mouth and without occupying the body of the man whose forgiveness he desired. Merrick said forgiveness would not erase the execution or return the first timeline's dead. However, he no longer believed Torren was the same man who had ignored him on the platform. He offered his hand. Torren accepted, and the gesture completed what had begun outside Briar Lake, not absolution, but a future neither man owed to the other's control. Young Torren stared at his older counterpart's new face, which still resembled him enough to feel unsettling. He asked whether he would also develop silver hair at 30. Sabine answered that regret had aged Torren selectively. Cauldron suggested the silver improved him, unlike certain capes, and escaped before young Torren could demonstrate the continued importance of military discipline. The clock collapsed into harmless crystal dust. Vara recovered its central safety plate and her father's maker mark, ensuring history would remember that workers, not kings, had built the release that saved them. King Roderick ordered Othmar, Bane, Valen, Grieve, and the Black Falcon physician held for public trial. He refused private execution, declaring that secrecy had created the conspiracy and openness would end it. Othmar warned that enemies would invade without his future knowledge. Torren answered that a country protected only by one man's stolen memories was already a prison waiting for the door to close. The king temporarily transferred emergency defense authority to a council including Pell, Edric, young Torren, Merrick, Sabine, border officers, and civilian delegates. Torren declined a seat before anyone could offer one. Young Torren suspected false modesty. Torren explained that he had resigned in the only future capable of giving him a body, making retirement not merely an emotional decision, but a legally binding miracle. Sabine said she would verify that miracle personally and regularly. For the first time, Torren recognized her teasing as an invitation rather than a distraction from duty. Othmar's trial lasted 6 weeks. Tribunal pages, meridian projections, witness accounts, poison records, and Grieve's confession established a conspiracy too distributed for any single forged document to erase. Grieve received a reduced sentence for testifying and was assigned to rebuild Fort Rellan's western barracks under the supervision of the soldiers he had abandoned. His first official duty involved cleaning the ceremonial fountain he had once mourned more than his men. Valen and Bane lost rank and served long public sentences restoring villages damaged by false royal operations. The Black Falcon physician was barred from practice, and required to assist licensed healers without controlling patient care. Othmar was stripped of succession rights and imprisoned in a former royal archive converted into a public records center. His consequence was not silence or disappearance. Every citizen could study the evidence of how he manufactured certainty. King Roderick abolished secret royal prisons, created independent review for emergency decrees, and gave frontier soldiers the right to refuse orders targeting civilians without charges. Commander Pell became the first elected head of the new Defense Council. Governor Edric accepted an advisory position after confirming the official portrait would retain his missing eye and remove the insulting amount of imaginary hair. Young Torren returned to Fort Rellan as commander, no longer protected by unquestioned reputation. He kept Merrick's written criticism beside his battle plans and asked subordinates to challenge him before mistakes became funerals. He retired the silver cape. Cauldron held a formal ceremony in which the garment was lowered into a storage chest, while 600 soldiers observed a respectful silence lasting almost 4 seconds. Merrick was cleared of treason and offered Grieve's former command. He refused at first, fearing that accepting would make him resemble the men who had used rank against him. Aloan reminded him that refusing power did not automatically make power safer. Merrick accepted on the condition that command records, casualty decisions, and disciplinary hearings remain open to soldiers' families. He transformed Fort Rellan into a rescue and intelligence command that specialized in preventing hostage coercion. Brass joined to locate families threatened by officials, while Vara became the chief engineer responsible for locks that always opened from both sides. Nessa completed her arithmetic lessons and received the sword she had requested. She discovered that she preferred legal investigation, though she kept the weapon nearby whenever officials attempted complicated explanations for missing money. Months later, Torren moved into a small house beside Sabine's clinic. The building had a garden, a kitchen table, and absolutely no strategic value, which made it the most difficult victory he had ever allowed himself to keep. He proposed to Sabine without medals, witnesses, or a prepared speech. He simply admitted that he had spent one lifetime postponing home and asked whether she would build one with the man who finally arrived. Sabine accepted, then informed him that arriving 32 years late did not excuse him from wedding preparations. Torren had negotiated peace between 7 nations, but choosing table linens nearly ended his confidence in diplomacy. Their wedding joined soldiers, physicians, printers, villagers, and the Dane family beneath the rebuilt bells of Dunmarrow. Merrick stood beside Torren, while young Torren served as witness after being forbidden from selecting his own clothing. Torren and Sabine later had 2 children and adopted a 3rd orphan during Othmar's manufactured border crisis. Torren taught them cooking before swordsmanship, though Sabine maintained that his soup remained more dangerous than most weapons. Merrick visited every winter with Eloan, Vara, and Nessa. The first year, he brought Torren a new silver cape as a joke. Torren used it to cover vegetables during an unexpected frost, finally granting the design a second useful purpose. One quiet evening, Torren placed his old sword above the fireplace instead of beside the door. Outside, Sabine and the children argued over apple pie while Merrick laughed at something Cauldron had exaggerated for the 10th time. Far beneath the ruined meridian chamber, one overlooked crystal fragment chimed forward instead of backward. It contained no command from Othmar, only an unknown woman's warning that another kingdom had built a clock without an emergency release. Torren heard the distant chime and looked toward the road, but he did not reach for the sword. He took Sabine's hand, returned to the crowded table, and chose to finish dinner before deciding whether tomorrow needed a hero.